I've never done Google Slides before, so apologies if anything gets wonky. Um, Thanks for being here. My name is Tim Shearer. I'm the AUL for Digital Strategies and IT at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I've been part of the Fedora world for, gosh, since probably 2008, where we started to use it for our repository systems. I've been on governance for a while, and I'm currently the chair. And I'm here to talk about Fedora, specifically about Fedora 6, but also about some of the work we've been doing to tap into the community and do strategic planning as well. We just announced the 6.2 release candidates available, and there'll be information about that at the backside if you're interested. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to talk about 4 things. So Tim's version of what is Fedora, a little bit about Fedora 6 and where we are today, something about called OCCFL, which most of you probably know about, but the Oxford Common File Layout. And then It Takes a Village, which is a tool for figuring out how to do strategic planning. I wanted to give acknowledgements to Aaron Griffiths, who's the program manager for Fedora and a LYRASIS employee for this presentation. And I'll say all gross generalizations, mixed metaphors, and errors are mine. Everything that's good in here belongs to her. All right, without further ado. This gets into Tim's a very short history, an editorialized version of Fedora. So my observation is that almost all repository systems are attached to their beginnings. So for example, Content DM was really about a picture and some metadata. In some ways, DSpace was about a PDF and some metadata. There are repositories that are about data sets and metadata, or monographs and metadata. Fedora is also tied to its past, but it started really as a theoretical approach to how one would build a preservation repository. So it's deeply rooted in its theory, and it still holds many of those sort of progenitor pieces in its system. And I just wanted to mention that. So what happened is a group of people thought, how are we going to build a preservation repository system? And they did, and it became called Fedora, and it went through versions 1, 2, and 3. In 3, I think it really stabilized. It became a part of a lot of preservation programs at institutions globally, and probably that's where the greatest install base happened, was at Fedora 3. And when it got there, it was really great at being modular, agnostic, and open. So by modular, what I mean is that you can put pieces together and build your own. It's not unlike Lego. The problem with Lego is you have to have a plan or figure out how you're going to build things. It's agnostic in the sense that it doesn't care what objects go in it. You can put a PDF in it, you can put a movie in it, you can put a data set in it. It's also agnostic about how you describe those things. So you can choose whatever controlled vocabulary or metadata models you wish. And it's also agnostic about how the relationships between those things are built. So instead of having a thesis that's a PDF, you can have a thesis that's a PDF that has 2 video files and 3 spreadsheets. And you can build the thesis as the aggregate of those objects, and Fedora supports that. It's also part of a preservation program. When it was in version 3, it was a very Fedora specific thing, but essentially what you wrote down to disk is something a human being could read, and you could literally rebuild the entire repository from disk. And a lot of people saw that as a great way to think about forestalling against risk and ensuring that your repository would last no matter what. For instance, if you had a corrupt database, it didn't matter. You could rebuild from disk. So that's Tim's unauthorized version of Fedora. With Fedora 4, there was a move in the community to try some really cool and interesting and good things. One of them was to start to explore linked data really heavily. And it kind of moved us from an XML model to a triple store model. Another thing that was a great idea was to begin not building tools that already existed, but rather bringing those tools into Fedora, into the Fedora stack. The net result, though, was that for the community, it was sometimes really hard to get from 3 to 4 because your whole way of doing business had changed. And unfortunately, at least one of the tools that we integrated into the stack caused real performance and stability issues. And so anyhow, Fedora 4 came with some challenges, both for people who had adopted and people who were trying to get there. So one of the cool things that also happened, though, was this idea of moving towards a published Fedora API. So you could worry less about Fedora as something you had to understand, but rather something you could just interact with in persistent ways. At the time, a deliberate decision was taken to move to 5 and then to 6 to get us back to something that was performant, scalable, and closer to the original version of Fedora 3, which people loved. So that's a little bit about what Fedora is. I want to say Fedora is also a community that I'm a part of and I love, and that includes people who are strategic, people who are thinking about theory and practice, people who are writing code. And some of the folks that use us are academic institutions and universities, cultural heritage organizations, research institutions, libraries, and government agencies. We're made of members. All right. You can think about Fedora in the context maybe of Sembera as being middleware. It can sit in the stack and manage essentially the ingest and relationships and management of objects and their metadata and their relationships and not have to worry about that piece. So the interface and discovery layers might be up here, and then there's Fedora in the middle doing the object management relationship mapping, and then there's some sort of storage under the hood. One of the things that Fedora can suffer from is people don't even sometimes know that it's a major part of their system. There's 3 main ways that people use Fedora: as part of Sembera, where it's an option, as part of Islandora, where it's an option, and some people, including the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, use it as a standalone. We built so many tools around archival support or archivist support that we have our roll our own Fedora in addition to a Hyrax repository. All right. So what does Fedora 6 offer? Well, we took the lessons from 3, we doubled down on them. So it really is thinking a lot about how your preservation program works and trying to be an integral part of digital preservation. We've found it to be robust, performant, and that it scales. We've removed some of the tools that were causing problems, and we did a lot of work to make sure that it is doing its own thing. One of the examples of a tool that we got rid of was ModeShape. It's increasingly turnkey. It is much easier to pop out a Fedora instance without having to know 50 million things and have a team of 12 people. So it's increasingly turnkey. Because it does so much abstraction and it has a published API, it supports integrations. So with other systems, just pass it to me, I'll pass it back. And migrations, it's easier to pass things forward. And it provides and uses standards. So as I mentioned, there's the published Fedora API spec, but it also leverages REST for standard web API access, linked data, access control, and versioning and messaging. And those are all, we think, really good things about it. All right. One of the things that we did as part of this move to get back to digital preservation program support was to adopt OCCFL, which was burgeoning at the time. In my mind, OCCFL is kind of again, agnostic, non-specific realization of what Fedora 3 used to do by publishing XML down to the file system in ways that were parsable. And so we've adopted as part of Fedora 6 OCCFL. I want to give props, and people on the call may want to add to the chat other folks who deserve credit for this, but the editorial board of OCCFL has included Andrew Hankinson, and currently also from the Bodleian, and currently has Neil Jeffries from the Bodleian, Rosalind Metz from Emory, Julian Morley from Stanford, Simeon Warner from Cornell, and Andrew Woods from Harvard. And I think the community owes them a debt of gratitude. I also want to mention Peter Winkles for his work as well. So what does OCCFL offer? Well, it offers an abstraction between the repository management system and the storage under the hood. It produces parsable, structured data that a human being could literally read if it was printed out, and understand what the repository was, what the objects in them were. It offers robustness, there's checksums, and all the things that you would hope for to mitigate against risk of data loss, data rot, something inadvertent happening, being able to get back. It offers versioning, and it offers a really elegant version of versioning, in that every change that happens can be trapped, but you only have to trap the diff. You only have to trap the part that changed. So for instance, if you had a PDF that never changed, but you changed the author, I don't know, the school's name changed, those changes are trapped, and you can walk forwards and backwards, but you don't have to rewrite the PDF file. It offers storage diversity because it's agnostic. It doesn't care what you put under the hood, including a networked file system, an attached file system, or cloud. And it's complete. It's a whole package. You should be able to recreate your repository literally from OCCFL. It's a super cool thing. If you don't know it, I hope you'll check it out. All right, some additional features that I want to mention about Fedora 6. We've put in performance monitoring, and this actually in some ways is a byproduct of making sure that it would scale. We wanted to know when we were building the system how it was doing. And so now people can benefit from the performance monitoring. People also asked for simple search. They just wanted to be able to peek around and see what was in the repository. That's been added. And there's a whole huge effort supported in part by an IMLS grant to look at version migrations. We specifically built 6 to be a whole lot more like 3, so that if people wanted to, they could skip directly from 3 to 6. There's tools that help you do the migration. So far, the evidence is they're working pretty well for folks. I know that all migrations are local. The decisions you've made about data modeling, metadata, and objects are yours. But what we've tried to do is get rid of some of the technical debt and the pain of migrations. At this point, I wanted to mention Seth Shaw at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where they have an Islandora set up. He's done a really nifty write-up of a migration that he did using the tooling. I've asked him if this is accurate, and he said yes. More or less, the major amount of time that was spent on the project was waiting for the system to grind through data. The major hiccups were 3 sort of semi-hidden embedded configurations, and the first cut was not throwing enough hardware at it using a dev server. But it is a true success story, and I'm super excited about it, and you can read about it. All right, so I wanted to talk also about another suite of tools that have come along with 6. It's the Camel Toolbox. It's a really nifty suite of microservices based on Apache Camel that lets you have a persistent way to talk out via HTTP to things. So you can basically post things out to Solr or a triple store. You can do fixity checking, you can do auditing, and basically call any HTTP endpoint. It's pretty nifty. All right, so I've talked a lot about Fedora, what it is, or Tim's version at least of what it is, and Fedora 6, what it's offering now. And I wanted to switch to specifically Fedora 6. So we hit our milestone last summer. I wanted to give a shout out to LYRASIS as an organizational home for that. There were, as some of you may know, some changes in staffing. There were some economic downturns that were a byproduct of the pandemic. And Fedora helped keep the staffing and the economics stable so that we could meet our deadline, and we did. Fedora 6 was released last summer and seems to be working great. So the question is kind of what do we do now? There's been this huge push to kind of take what happened between 3 and 4 and get back to where we think it should be, and it is there. So what do we do now? Well, the Fedora governance and LYRASIS partnership have done some work around information gathering sessions. So what we did is we reached out to the community and just said, hey, we'd like to talk to you not just about Fedora, but about your repository programs. And those were really fruitful, and actually they were really rewarding. What we were hearing from the community was Fedora 6 is what they want and need. In fact, part of why they wanted is Fedora 3 was stable. Everyone was saying Fedora 3 just works. It's the only part of my repository stack I don't have to think about. And Fedora 6 holds the promise of basically filling that niche. So that was great. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't dropping the ball and saying, well, 6 is done. So there was a community technology survey done, and thanks to the folks that participated in that, and that generated some new features. There's open weekly tech meetings where folks can come and talk. And then at governance, we built a couple of teams to look at strategic planning. And this gets me to my fourth thing. So I did Fedora, what is it? Fedora 6, where are we? OCCFL, and now I want to talk about It Takes a Village. So what we did is we got together in January and we built some groups to start thinking about how we could do strategic planning for where do we take Fedora and the program in the community next. And fortuitously, there's a tool called It Takes a Village. And I want to also give a shout out to Lori Arp from LYRASIS and Megan Forbes, who's the program manager at Collection Space, who are the architects and sort of the leads on It Takes a Village. But It Takes a Village is kind of a toolkit and a framework to think about how you would do strategic planning, how to figure out how to make your open source project sustainable. And it's lovely. It's vetted. It takes you through steps that you don't have to think up on your own. You don't drop balls, and it's easy to engage with. So anyhow, with the help of LYRASIS, and I also want to give a shout out to Heather Greer-Klein for helping moderate some of these, we've begun this process of engaging with It Takes a Village. There are 4 parts to It Takes a Village. There's technology, there's governance, there's resources, and there's community engagement. And what we wanted to do was start with what should we focus on? So we gave a pre-work assessment to all the participants on all 4 of the aspects. And then looking at the results of the pre-work assessment, we found that the 2 areas that people had the most to say about and the most potential for digging in were community engagement and resources. So that was based on a ranked series of statements. What's really great about It Takes a Village is then having chosen what you want to focus on, there's a series of activities you can do based on what you've decided is most important. And those activities then lead to action items. So we've been working as a group, to do those exercises, identify those areas, and then move on those. And we're partway through that. What we hope to do is come up with a series of action items and then move forward on those, which will be project planning. Some steps and lessons learned. Collaboration is huge. Broadening your view, widening the angle of your lens to bring in more voices. We were deliberately trying to bring in folks who are repository managers and not just technologists or leaders, to make sure that we were getting folks globally who might have different perspectives on, for instance, privacy, Europe. So broadening that lens and collaborating. Lean on the tool to mitigate bias. We were absolutely sure the 2 things we were going to look at were resourcing, so think dollars and people and brains and software developers, and technology. And it turns out that we did stick with resources, but we added community and not technology for where we wanted to bring our focus. So lean on the tools. And as I said, bring in voices from different areas. And this is the requisite slide to thank people who support Fedora. These are folks who provide funding and brains and leadership and governance and code to Fedora, and we're grateful for them. And then I just wanted to leave you with a slide that has some of the links. So you can download the current version of Fedora, the latest release as well. You can learn more about It Takes a Village. We have a wiki where lots of things are documented. I really want to give a shout out to the Slack channel. there's Slack for Fedora broadly. There's a tech channel, and I really wanted to highlight that there's a migration channel where there's a lot of cool activity about migrations. You can join our community mailing list. You can follow along on YouTube and subscribe to the newsletter. And Aaron would kill me if I didn't say, and you can become a member. We are always looking for people to help strengthen Fedora and how it fits into the broader ecosystem and how it meets the needs of the community. And with that, I will say thanks and leave you with Erin Griffin's name. You should feel free to reach out to her or to me for anything you'd like to discuss. And with that, I will stop sharing.